Imagine standing at the edge of a vast desert, the sun beating down relentlessly as you gaze at a fence stretching endlessly into the horizon. It's not just wire and metal, it's a line drawn by history, politics, and power, separating dreams from despair. You've heard the stories of families torn apart, of desperate journeys ending in tragedy, of lives forever altered by an invisible boundary. This is the reality for millions around the world, where borders aren't merely geographical markers, but profound instruments of control. In our interconnected era, where information flows freely and technology promises boundless possibilities, why do we still cling to these divisions? This article delves into the intricate web of borders, laws, and mechanisms of control that shape global freedom, exploring how they emerged, how they function, and what they mean for humanity's quest for liberty. By examining historical roots, psychological underpinnings, and real-world impacts, we'll uncover the delicate balance between security and subjugation, inviting you to question the very foundations of the world we navigate. Borders have long been more than lines on a map. They are the physical manifestations of human ambition, fear, and the desire for order. To understand their grip on freedom, we must travel back through time. The concept of defined territories dates to ancient civilizations, where empires like Rome erected walls not just for defense, but to assert dominance and regulate movement. The Great Wall of China, snaking across rugged landscapes for over 13,000 miles, wasn't merely a barrier against invaders, it symbolized the emperor's control over his subjects, dictating who could enter or leave the realm. Fast forward to the 17th century, and the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 marks a pivotal moment. Emerging from the ashes of the 30 Years' War, this agreement formalized the modern nation-state, granting sovereign powers the right to draw borders and enforce laws within them. It was a revolutionary shift, transforming fluid tribal lands into rigid political entities. But with this came a cost. Freedom of movement, once a natural human right, became a privilege doled out by governments. Laws, the invisible threads weaving through these borders, evolved alongside them as tools of control. In the 19th century, as industrialization spurred mass migration, European nations crafted immigration laws to filter the desirable from the undesirable. Britain's Aliens Act of 1905, for instance, targeted Eastern European Jews fleeing pogroms, setting a precedent for exclusion based on ethnicity and class. Across the Atlantic, the United States Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred an entire nationality, fueled by xenophobia and economic fears. These weren't isolated policies, they reflected a global pattern where laws codified inequality, restricting freedom under the guise of national interest. Post 9/11, this control intensified with acts like the USA Patriot Act, which expanded surveillance and border security, ostensibly to combat terrorism, but often encroaching on civil liberties. Data from the United Nations reveals that since 2000, over 60 countries have built or fortified border walls, a stark reminder that in our global village, divisions are deepening rather than dissolving. These historical developments highlight a fundamental tension. Borders and laws provide structure and safety, yet they inherently limit freedom. They create a world where a person's birthplace determines their opportunities, perpetuating global disparities. Consider the migrant worker from Guatemala, trekking thousands of miles to the U.S. border, only to face razor wire and deportation. This isn't just a personal struggle, it's a symptom of how borders enforce economic hierarchies, trapping billions in cycles of poverty while the privileged cross freely with passports and visas. As we peel back these layers, it becomes clear that control isn't accidental, it's engineered, rooted in power dynamics that echo through centuries. Beyond the historical scaffolding, the true power of borders and laws lies in their mechanisms of control, subtle, pervasive systems that infiltrate daily life and mold human behavior. At their core, these mechanisms operate on dual levels, the tangible and the intangible. Physical borders, like the infamous Berlin Wall that divided Germany from 1961 to 1989, serve as stark enforcers. Erected during the Cold War, this concrete barrier, topped with barbed wire and guarded by watchtowers, didn't just separate East from West. It embodied the Iron Curtain's grip, preventing over 5 0 escape attempts and claiming at least 140 lives. Today, echoes persist in structures like the U.S.-Mexico border wall, spanning nearly 700 miles with sensors, drones, and patrols, designed to stem migration flows amid political rhetoric about security. Yet, these visible fortifications are just the tip of the iceberg. Digital borders have emerged as even more insidious tools where laws harness technology to monitor and restrict. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, while protective of privacy, also empowers governments to track data across borders, creating virtual checkpoints in cyberspace. In the U.S., the Patriot Act's legacy lives on through programs like PRISM, revealed by Edward Snowden in 2013, which allowed the NSA to collect vast troves of internet data, blurring the lines between national security and personal intrusion. Delving deeper, the psychological impact of these controls reveals a profound erosion of freedom. French philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of the panopticon, a prison design where inmates are always potentially watched, leading to self-regulation, aptly describes modern surveillance societies. In this setup, the mere awareness of being monitored fosters compliance, even without constant oversight. Imagine scrolling through social media in a country like China, where the Great Firewall and laws like the Cybersecurity Law of 2017 censor content and track users via apps like WeChat. Citizens internalize the gaze of the state, censoring their own thoughts to avoid repercussions, a phenomenon psychologists term chilling effect. Studies from the American Psychological Association highlight how such environments heighten anxiety and suppress creativity. For instance, a 2020 survey found that 40% of internet users in authoritarian regimes self-censor online, stifling free expression. This isn't limited to dictatorships; democracies grapple with it too. During the COVID-19 pandemic, apps tracking movement for contact tracing, mandated by laws in places like South Korea and Singapore, saved lives but raised alarms about normalized surveillance, potentially outlasting the virus. These mechanisms don't operate in isolation. They intersect with human psychology to reinforce control. Fear, a primal driver, is often weaponized. Think of how post-9/11 laws amplified Islamophobia, justifying expanded border checks that profiled millions. Anecdotes abound. Take Aya, a Syrian refugee who, in 2015, braved the Aegean Sea to reach Greece, only to be ensnared in the EU-Turkey deal's bureaucratic web, her freedom curtailed by laws prioritizing border integrity over human dignity. Her story, echoed in reports from Amnesty International, illustrates how controls dehumanize, reducing individuals to statistics in a system that values order over empathy. On a broader scale, economic mechanisms tie into this, with laws like those governing trade borders creating free zones for corporations while restricting labor mobility. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, now USMCA, facilitated goods crossing borders seamlessly but left workers vulnerable, as seen in Maquiladora factories along the U.S.-Mexico line, where low-wage exploitation thrives under lax enforcement. This duality exposes how controls perpetuate inequality, granting freedom to capital while chaining the individual. As we navigate these layers, it's evident that borders and laws aren't static. They adapt, leveraging technology and psychology to maintain dominance. Yet, this adaptability also sows seeds of resistance as people push back against the invisible cages that define their worlds. To truly grasp the scope of borders, laws, and control as checks on global freedom, we must turn our lens to specific examples from around the world, where these forces play out in dramatic, often heartbreaking ways. Let's start with the Indian subcontinent, where the partition of 1947 drew a hasty border between India and Pakistan, displacing over 14 million people and igniting violence that claimed up to 2 million lives. This line, etched by British colonial rulers in mere weeks, severed families, communities, and histories overnight. Today, the Wagah border crossing, with its ceremonial gate-closing rituals performed by soldiers in elaborate uniforms, symbolizes a theatrical standoff, but beneath the spectacle lies profound human cost. Families like those of the Sikhs in Punjab, divided by the Radcliffe Line, endure visa hurdles and bureaucratic mazes just to reunite, their freedom curtailed by laws rooted in post-colonial grudges. United Nations data underscores this. Since partition, border disputes have fueled ongoing conflicts, including the Kashmir crisis, where militarized zones restrict movement and suppress local autonomy, turning a paradise into a powder keg. Shifting to Africa, colonial borders imposed by European powers during the 1884–1885 Berlin Conference carved up the continent with little regard for ethnic or cultural realities, sowing seeds of enduring strife. The arbitrary lines grouped rival tribes together or split cohesive groups apart, as seen in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Belgian-drawn borders exacerbated resource wars and displaced millions. Laws enforcing these boundaries, often backed by international agreements like those from the African Union, prioritize state sovereignty over human mobility, leading to refugee crises. Consider the Rohingya people, fleeing Myanmar's borders into Bangladesh since 2017. Over 1 million now languish in camps, their freedom negated by laws that label them stateless. A 2022 Human Rights Watch report details how border controls, including razor wire fences and naval patrols, trap them in limbo, denying access to education, work, and dignity. These examples reveal a pattern. Borders aren't neutral. They're weapons of exclusion, amplified by laws that institutionalize discrimination. In-depth analysis shows how these controls intersect with broader phenomena, such as climate change and pandemics, creating new frontiers of restriction. Rising sea levels, projected by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to displace 200 million people by 2050, are redrawing borders in places like the Maldives or Pacific Islands, where sinking land forces climate refugees to seek asylum. Yet, laws like Australia's stringent Migration Act treat them as security threats, detaining them in offshore centers under the guise of border protection. This echoes the COVID-19 era, when global lockdowns and travel bans, enforced through apps and quarantines, curtailed freedoms unprecedentedly. In Italy, for instance, strict movement laws during 2020 peaks fined citizens for venturing beyond neighborhoods, saving lives but fostering a sense of entrapment that lingered in mental health surveys showing increased depression rates. Quotes from thinkers like Hannah Arendt illuminate this. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, she warned that statelessness strips away the right to have rights, a reality for 82 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, per UNHCR figures. Economically, drug laws exemplify control's insidious reach. The U.S. war on drugs, launched in the 1970s, has built a lattice of borders and statutes that incarcerate disproportionately, with over 2.3 million behind bars, many for non-violent offenses. This system, critiqued in Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, uses laws to control marginalized communities, limiting freedom through mandatory minimums and border interdictions that fuel cartels in Mexico. Globally, similar policies in the Philippines under Duterte's regime led to extrajudicial killings, justified as border security against narcotics. These cases connect to psychological analyses, where control breeds resistance movements like Mexico's caravans of migrants challenge walls, embodying a human drive for liberty amid oppression. Through these lenses, borders and laws emerge as dynamic forces, not just containing threats, but shaping identities and inequalities on a planetary scale. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power and privilege in our shared world. Expanding our exploration, we see how the tendrils of borders and laws extend far beyond physical lines and legal texts, infiltrating the fabric of everyday life and reshaping societies in profound ways. What begins as a checkpoint at a national frontier morphs into a network of controls that govern our routines, from the streets we walk to the data we share. Consider the ubiquity of surveillance cameras in urban landscapes. London alone boasts over 600, creating a digital panopticon where every step is potentially recorded. Laws like the UK's Investigatory Powers Act of 2016 legitimize this, granting authorities access to communications under the banner of counterterrorism, yet it subtly erodes personal freedom, making citizens wary of public spaces. This creep into daily existence isn't confined to security. Labor laws, for instance, often serve as invisible borders restricting workers' rights. In global supply chains, regulations in countries like Bangladesh limit union activities to maintain competitive export zones, trapping garment workers in exploitative conditions reminiscent of modern serfdom. A vivid anecdote comes from the 2013 Rana Plaza collapse, where over 100 died due to lax enforcement, highlighting how laws prioritize economic borders over human welfare, curtailing the freedom to demand fair treatment. This expansion carries both benefits and perils, a double-edged sword that safeguards while it subjugates. On one hand, controls foster stability. Think of how international aviation laws and border protocols prevented chaos during the early COVID-19 outbreaks, enabling coordinated responses that saved countless lives. Yet the trade-offs are steep, often sparking social upheaval when freedoms are squeezed too tightly. The Arab Spring uprisings of 2010-2012, ignited in Tunisia and spreading across borders, were a direct backlash against repressive laws under dictators like Mubarak in Egypt, where internet blackouts and movement restrictions fueled mass protests demanding liberty. Similarly, the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States surged in 2020, challenging policing laws that function as internal borders, disproportionately controlling Black and minority communities through stop-and-frisk policies rooted in the war on drugs era. Research from the Pew Research Center shows that such controls correlate with higher inequality, with 70% of Americans in a 2021 poll expressing concern over surveillance's impact on privacy. These movements illustrate a ripple effect. When laws and borders stifle expression, they breed resentment, leading to bursts of collective action that redefine societal norms. In vivid terms, it's like a pressure cooker build the walls too high, and the steam finds explosive outlets, reshaping the landscape in unpredictable ways. Moreover, this societal fallout connects to broader knowledge domains, such as environmental justice and technological ethics. As climate borders emerge, laws dictating resource access like those governing water rights along the Nile exacerbate tensions between nations, potentially igniting water wars that limit freedoms for entire populations. In the tech realm, AI-driven border controls, piloted in the EU's iBorder control system, use lie detection algorithms to screen migrants, raising ethical quandaries about bias and dehumanization. These extensions remind us that control isn't static. It evolves, weaving into life's tapestry and forcing us to weigh security against the human spirit's innate yearning for autonomy. Through these dynamics, societies grapple with the paradox. Borders and laws build order, but at what cost to the freedoms that define our humanity? In reflecting on the intricate dance of borders, laws, and control, we've journeyed through history's forging fires, unraveled the psychological webs that bind us, examined global flashpoints of human struggle, and traced the creeping expansion into everyday existence. At their essence, these elements form a global architecture designed to impose order on chaos, yet they often exact a heavy toll on the very freedom they purport to protect. From the ancient walls that guarded empires to the digital firewalls of today, borders have evolved as symbols of sovereignty, while laws act as the enforcers, channeling human movement, expression, and opportunity into narrow corridors defined by power. We've seen how they perpetuate inequality, strapping refugees in camps, silencing voices through surveillance, and fueling social upheavals when the pressure becomes unbearable. Yet amid the constraints, there's a resilient undercurrent, the human impulse to transcend these barriers, evident in migrations that defy walls and movements that rewrite unjust laws. This exploration invites a deeper contemplation. In an age of accelerating globalization and technological prowess, will borders dissolve into irrelevance, or will they harden into even more sophisticated instruments of control? As artificial intelligence and climate shifts redraw the maps, we must ask ourselves what true freedom means: not just the absence of chains, but the presence of equity and agency for all. Perhaps the path forward lies in reimagining these structures, advocating for policies that prioritize humanity over hegemony, such as global compacts for safe migration or ethical frameworks for surveillance. Ultimately, the story of borders and laws is our collective narrative, one that challenges us to engage, reflect, and act, ensuring that control serves freedom rather than subduing it. What role will you play in reshaping this world?